Hi there, and on this episode, we're taking a look at how to analyze historical sources using Avid's Acaps model. Acaps is an acronym that stands for author, context, audience, purpose, and significance. The author of a source can tell you a lot about why it was created, or even alert you to some of the biases that the source author may have had. The author of a particular source can tell you a lot about why it was created. It can also tell you what the author may have left out or what they may have dramatized because of their own background or their own biases. Next is C for context. This simply means, when was the source created? This could be a date, a time period, or even after a certain or before a certain event that you're studying. Context is important because it usually tells us, the audience, why the source was created. The events and the world around the creation of a source can affect its meaning. It can remove certain perspectives or add new ones. Next is A for audience. Now, who was the source created for? When you're reading through, or you're looking at a photo, or listening to a podcast, a speech, a documentary, it's important for you to understand, who is supposed to be listening to this? Was this aimed at people this individual knew? Was it directed at a large audience? Was this created for personal or private use? In many cases, the audience could be simply anyone willing to listen. Sometimes it's a specific person, like if you're writing a letter. The letter usually is not meant to be read by everybody. In today's context, it'd be a text message or DM or Snap. You don't want everyone to see certain messages that you send, because maybe you're speaking in a more casual way. Maybe you are venting to a friend, and you would never say those things to the actual person that you're venting about or situation. That is true of people in the past as well. So, who they're speaking to, or showing a picture to, or video recording, is incredibly important to understand. The next letter is P for purpose. Why was the source created? What was the intention behind its creation? Some of the terms you might encounter when you're answering this question are to inform. You're simply laying out the facts, or you're making clear a situation that has taken place. When you're reading a source, are they just simply telling you the information? Okay, well, then maybe it's to inform you of something you didn't know about. This could be textbooks, it could be news articles, it could be encyclopedias. Maybe the author is trying to accomplish the next one, and that is to persuade. Think of this as an argument. They're trying to convince you of something, or they're trying to persuade you to do something else. Take an action, change a belief. This could be found in speeches. Certainly, court arguments are persuasion. The next is to simply entertain. A lot of times, sources are made for our entertainment. Think of movies, shows. These are still sources depending on what your topic is. Sometimes artistic paintings. There's no meaning behind it besides the fact that it's meant to be entertaining to us, the viewer. It's important to know that if your source is meant for entertainment, that might affect the severity you should approach it with. The fourth purpose for an author to create a source that I want to cover today is to document or record. Sometimes people just want to record what's going on. We're very familiar with this today, since we all have phones and audio recording devices in our pockets in everyday life. This has been true for about 150 years. People just wanted to record the world around them. And if you go back even further, a lot of times historians wanted to simply write down the order of events just so they knew them. There wasn't really a motive beyond that. Lastly, we have S for significance. When a source is created, why do we care? Why should we know what this source says or what information the source carries? Now, if you are writing a paper, you are creating a project, your significance usually is the question or research question you are trying to answer. If you can read a source, look at a source, listen to a source, and you can tell me, how does this help you answer your research question? That is significance. Now, all of these letters are part of an acronym created by Avid. Avid is an organization that helps reading around the nation. Some schools are affiliated with Avid, some are not. The school I work at is affiliated with Avid. So I use the Acaps acronym when I am helping students analyze a source. You might be familiar with other acronyms like HIPPO. Either one are fine. They're all kind of the same. They get after the same overall meaning. So let's go over an example together. This speech, obviously abbreviated, was given by President George W. Bush following the September 11th attacks on the World Trade Center and Pentagon. The speech reads, "Good evening. Today our nation saw evil in the very worst of human nature, and we responded with the best of America. With the daring of our rescue workers, with the caring for strangers and neighbors who came to give blood and help in any way they could. None of us will ever forget this day. Yet we go forward to defend freedom and all that is good and just in our world." Now, I cut out a lot of the speech because I didn't really want to focus on the entire speech. It's really long. I just wanted to focus on some excerpts from it. So, who is the author? Well, if it does not say right underneath the source, just go to Google and type it in. Ask the question, who created, and then enter the document name. If you don't know the document name, describe it as best as you can, and this means you might have to go through a couple websites until you get the name. Now, if you don't know anything about this author just on your own knowledge, keep researching. Google search the author. Simply ask, who took this photograph? Who wrote this speech? Whose diary is this? Get details from them. Learning more about the author will help you understand what is their perspective. Now, this speech was written by the President of the United States. The President had to come talk to the nation because his country was attacked. The people of our country were afraid, and he is who we all look to when we are afraid. That's the nature of an executive head. So most likely the president would have given this speech to help calm the United States, to calm the people down after an attack. Now this leads us to context. When was this source created? He gave this speech, according to my caption, on the actual day, September 11th, 2001. If you want to double check it, just simply go to a Google search and ask, when did President George W. Bush give, and then type in the speech title, right? His response to 9/11, if you don't know the title. This speech was given while he was sitting in the White House. This was really important because when your country is being attacked, the people want to know that their president is safe. And in fact, the president did disappear for part of the day. I don't mean just to the American people. I mean, he disappeared to the larger US military network at one point in time. Now, how would you know this? You would have to Google search it. There's a couple documentaries you could watch, but this requires more research. When you are coming across material for a project or paper, you might have to do a lot more research than what actually goes into the paper. I've just given you an example of that. So when he gives this speech in his office, it reassures the American people, oh, he's safe. He's in the house where he's supposed to be, and his house was not attacked on a day when a lot of our institutions were attacked. Now, moving on to audience. We kind of talked about this already. Who's his audience? This is where you have to make a judgment call based on the context and who was speaking. The President of the United States, based on what he said today, our nation. Later, he says, none of us. Clearly, he's referring to the American people. You can make this judgment call based on the context of what he wrote and what is actually within that speech. So context as in C, September 11th, following the attacks, and context as in what he actually wrote. Now, purpose. It's clearly not to entertain. This speech was not meant to entertain the American people. It was meant to inform the American people. It was informally informing them that he was alive and well. It also was informing the American people of a clear sequence of events. He informed the American people of what had happened. But it goes beyond that. It goes into persuasion. Now, if you keep reading this document, you'll find that it's essentially a call to respond. It is asking Americans to come together and move towards action. You could argue this is a persuasive source. Now, if you were to say informed, depending on your teacher, depending on your project, you're not too off base. You are somewhat accurate. But I would say this falls in persuasion because it is part of a larger call for the US to use military action to respond to this attack. Finally, significance. Why is this important? Well, if you studied the events that come after this, you would know that this speech leads to the passage of the AUMF 2001 and the Patriot Act. These are two pieces of legislation that fundamentally alter the presidential power that exists for wartime. So this brings us to S, significance. How does this source impact the rest of the world? Or rather, what can you learn from this in your research process? Well, following the speech, President George W. Bush asks for war powers from Congress, and he's given not just some war powers, but arguably a lot. The most you could possibly get without an official declaration of war, and it comes in the form of the Authorization to Use Military Force 2001. Now, if I'm researching 9/11, I probably should also know what happens afterwards. I should know Authorization to Use Military Force 2001. How would have I learned this? Well, it will pop up if you are reading about this event in secondary sources. And if it doesn't, a simple Google search, what happened following these events, will bring up some of this information. When you're looking at significance, it's also a good idea to highlight the main idea. America was attacked. Americans united, and we will not give up. That is essentially the message that he's conveying here. He then is going to use that to gain military power. Now, why is this important? Well, we actually still live under the same laws today that were passed following this speech. It's important today, obviously, beyond the personal relationships and the personal connection that Americans had to this event, but it's important to the children that followed because it fundamentally altered the United States. This speech unified Americans when they were feeling at one point in time ununified. The 2000 election divided Americans. Well, following this, George W. Bush, his rating skyrockets. He hits 90%. It's important to understand when you're analyzing one source, you are still bringing in the knowledge that you've gained through other sources you've read. Now, this is going to take time. Early in your researching, it's going to take you a long time to digest one source. But as you consume more and more material, as you listen to more speeches, read more letters, read more secondary sources, this becomes easier and easier. Thank you so much for watching. Please hit the subscribe button if you want to follow along as I post more learning materials as well as historical lectures and other documents that can be used if you're a student or even a teacher.